The Cat Show by Joan E. Cass, illustrated by William Stobbs. To Jane and Johnny with love. The Siamese cats of the lilacs, Sarah, Melissa, and Marmaduke. Join them as they go out and about, enjoying adventures big and small. Sarah, the pedigreed Siamese cat, was sitting on the porch of the lilacs with her two beautiful and distinguished kittens. Melissa, one of the kittens, was wearing a huge bow of pink satin ribbon. Marmaduke, her twin, was wearing a blue one. The lilacs was a very smart and elegant villa, and the cats were smart and elegant too. They all belonged to the Mrs. Watkins. People passing by in the street stopped to look at them and exclaimed to each other, "What a handsome cat! What beautiful kittens! How proud the Mrs. Watkins must be!" Outside the house was a board with a large notice on it, which read, "Take your cats to the cat show at Bridgeport. Cats and kittens to parade before the judges at 2 o'clock prompt. Medals for the prize-winning cats. Consolation prizes." Of course, the Mrs. Watkins had entered Sarah and her kittens, and though it was a little early, they were all ready and waiting. Mr. Humber, who kept the garage down the road, was coming to fetch them. He was going to drive them himself all the way to Bridgeport in one of his smartest cars, for it was at least 20 miles. The Mrs. Watkins were taking a picnic lunch with them to eat on the way, dainty chicken sandwiches and fruitcake for themselves, minced liver for the cats, and some large meat pies for Mr. Humber. All Sarah's cat friends were sitting along the wall by the river in the hot summer sun. They had gathered together to give Sarah a rousing send-off. There was Ginger Moll, the beautiful orange puss from the fish shop. She had just eaten her breakfast and was feeling sleepy and well-fed. Esmeralda, lean and black, and known as the rat catcher, was sleepy too. She had spent a busy and exhausting night watching, waiting, listening, crouching, and pouncing. The rats in the cellar of the corn merchant's shop where she lived had been squeaking and scuffling from sunset to sunrise. Arabella, the alley cat who lived in the garage, had brought her two kittens, Susie and Sweetie. She would have liked to enter them for the cat show, but no one had suggested it. Susie and Sweetie were a little plain, just black and white with rather snub noses, yet they were beautifully behaved, because Arabella was very firm with them. Stanley, the station cat who looked after the trains, had taken the morning off. He was a little sorry that the Mrs. Watkins were going by car. Stanley would have liked to put down the red carpet at the station and to have seen them off on the Bridgeport train in style. The 4 houseboats tied alongside the jetty all had cats, but only the 5 little tabbies from the Gypsy Queen had bothered to come. They belonged to Bill Briggs, who always called them those flipping little cats. The tabbies always enjoyed an outing, but they could never keep still. Now they were jumping on and off the wall, chasing their shadows, making the other cats feel hot just to look at them. Then up drove Mr. Humber in a large, bright red car. He stopped with a jerk, a flourish, and a toot right in front of the lilacs. Out hurried the Mrs. Watkins, carrying a beautiful open silk-lined basket. Sarah and her kittens jumped in it, and they all settled themselves comfortably in the back of the car. Mr. Humber put the extra rugs and cushions, the deck chairs, and picnic basket in the front. Then the car moved away in a cloud of dust, and the cats on the wall mewed long and loud farewells. After driving for about 8 miles, Mr. Humber stopped the car by the roadside. There was a wide patch of green grass, a tall chestnut tree, a little stream that ran under a bridge and on through a wood, and meadows which stretched away to the edge of the sky. "A grand place for a picnic," he said, "if I might suggest it." Mr. Humber helped the Mrs. Watkins out of the car and put up the deck chairs. He put the basket at their feet. The sun shone very, very brightly, and it became hotter and hotter. The Mrs. Watkins had brought their knitting, but as they lay back in their chairs, their eyes slowly closed. It was much too hot to do anything but sleep. Mr. Humber put his newspaper over his face and began to snore loudly. Sarah dozed peacefully, her head on her paws. "Be good and go to sleep," she purred to the kittens. Melissa and Marmaduke were not a bit sleepy. They put their heads over the edge of the basket, listened and waited. Then, when they were quite sure no one would notice them, they leapt out and scampered away as fast as they could. They went straight to the stream because they were Siamese cats. Siamese cats love water. The little stream was cool and clear, running over sand, low mud banks, and bright pebbles. There were rushes, waterweed, and floating leaves. Tiny fish swam in the deep pools. Melissa fell in at once and in her excitement tore her pink satin ribbon. Marmaduke scratched up the wet sand with his feet, and soon he was covered with it. His ribbon came undone and floated away down the stream and out of sight. Melissa was soon very wet and muddy. She tried to catch the little fishes by putting her paw down into the water, but the fishes swam away from her. Marmaduke rolled over and over in the sand till it got right into his ears. They had fun. Every minute they got wetter and dirtier and dirtier and wetter, but they didn't care. Presently, a little cloud drifted over the sun and a gentle breeze sprang up, and all at once the Mrs. Watkins awoke. They remembered that they were going to the cat show, and it was getting late. This would never do. Sarah stretched and blinked, and Mr. Humber took the newspaper from his face and wiped his forehead with a large handkerchief. "Come along, kittens," called the Mrs. Watkins. "It's time we had our lunch." But the kittens were nowhere to be seen. They had vanished like dew on summer grass. The Mrs. Watkins were overcome with fright and despair. "Melissa, Marmaduke, Melissa, Marmaduke," they called, but no kittens appeared. They looked under the rugs, the cushions, and the chairs. Mr. Humber searched the car inside and out and peered up the chestnut tree, saying to himself all the time, oh dear, what has happened? What are we going to do now? Why ever did I go to sleep?" Sarah mewed pitifully and padded aimlessly round and round, but she was no help at all. Then down the road came Bill Briggs in his jeep. He was taking a load of scrap metal into Bridgeport, and sitting among the old tin cans were all the other cats. Ginger Moll, Esmeralda, Arabella with her kittens, Susie and Sweetie, Stanley from the station, and the 5 little tabbies were all there, crowded together. They had decided to go to the cat show themselves. As soon as Bill Briggs saw the Mrs. Watkins walking up and down by the roadside, wringing their hands and looking very upset, he stopped his jeep, for he guessed something had happened. "They've mislaid those flipping little kittens, I'll be bound," he said to himself. "Just like my flipping little tabbies, always getting into mischief." He jumped out of his jeep, and all the cats got out too. "Can I do anything to help, ma'am?" he said, taking off his hat. "You look as though you're in trouble." "It's the kittens," cried the Mrs. Watkins, nearly in tears. "They've gone." "Gone," said Bill Briggs. "Yes, gone," said Mr. Humber. "Disappeared, departed, vanished, perished, lost, stolen, strayed." It sounded extremely depressing. "Nonsense," said Ginger Moll firmly to Esmeralda. "Those kittens are not far away." Esmeralda looked around and saw the stream. "Playing in that water, I expect, and getting themselves soaked," she said, for she knew Sarah's kittens. "I suppose we'd better find them before they drown themselves," said Arabella. So while Stanley and the 5 little tabbies gathered around Sarah and tried to calm her, and Susie and Sweetie did their best to open the picnic basket, the 3 other cats made a beeline for the stream. In a matter of minutes they were back. Ginger Moll carried Melissa by the scruff of her neck. Esmeralda carried Marmaduke. Both kittens were kicking and mewing because they didn't want to come at all. "Oh, you bad, bad little kittens," said the Mrs. Watkins joyfully, taking Melissa and Marmaduke in their arms. Thank you, cats. What should we have done without your help? But we must go at once, or we shall be late for the cat show." "What? No lunch?" said Mr. Humber, feeling rather peeved. He wanted his meat pies. In a moment, everything was bustle and confusion. Mr. Humber bundled up the cushions, rugs, chairs, and picnic baskets into the car. Then they all drove off as fast as they could. Meanwhile, the kittens were tidied up, their faces were wiped, their coats brushed, and their feet dried. Luckily, the Mrs. Watkins had brought new ribbons, and these were put around their necks. Then they sat in their silk-lined basket, looking annoyed and bad-tempered. The Mrs. Watkins opened the picnic basket, and each ate a sandwich and a piece of cake. Sarah took a little liver, and Mr. Humber had an enormous bite from his meat pie while holding the steering wheel with one hand. The gravy ran down his chin, but the pie tasted very good. Melissa and Marmaduke were too angry to eat. They sat in their silk-lined basket and refused everything in the most unpleasant way. Bill Briggs and all the other cats followed in the jeep. They didn't bother with lunch. They had eaten a huge breakfast. They arrived at the cat show just in time. All the other entries had been seen, and the judges were just calling out their names. Sarah led Melissa and Marmaduke forward, but they still looked very cross and sulky. Marmaduke fell over his ribbon, which he had pulled undone. Then Melissa bit his tail, and right in front of the judges, he turned around and spat at her. Sarah was terribly ashamed. In spite of these disgraceful manners, the kittens looked wonderful. Their coats were the creamy brown of wood smoke and shone in the sunlight like bees' wings. Their feet and ears were tipped with black, and their eyes as blue as forget-me-nots. "First prize, certainly first prize," said the judges, looking at their marks. They were overcome with delight. These were the finest kittens they had seen. They hung gold medals on silver ribbons around Melissa's and Marmaduke's necks, and a red and gold rosette was presented to Sarah. "Someone should teach those kittens how to behave," said the Lady Maris in an icy voice. "Beauty is only skin deep." Meanwhile, Arabella, who had been looking forlorn and despondent, felt she just must exhibit Susie and Sweetie. Bill Briggs, who was a most understanding sort of chap, saw at once what she wanted. He got out his pen and quickly filled in an entry form, found 2 bits of red twine in his pocket, and tied them around Susie and Sweetie's necks, and said to the judges, "Another entry, just in time, I think." And Arabella quickly led Susie and Sweetie forward. They behaved beautifully. They held their tails high, lifted up their feet daintily, and looked straight ahead, keeping a kitten length between each of them. As they passed the judges' seats, they quietly and modestly bowed their heads. The judges were entranced. "What lovely manners," said the Lady Maris. "There is a mother who knows how to control her children. I shall award them a consolation prize." And she took out of her basket 3 large tins of sardines, a jar of shrimps, and at least a pound of liver. Bill Briggs stepped hastily forward to receive the prizes. They were much too heavy for Arabella. In any case, she was quite overwhelmed with pride and joy. It was a merry party that returned to Riverview Road. Melissa and Marmaduke were tired out and slept all the way home in their silver-lined basket. This was a relief for everyone. Arabella invited Sarah, Ginger Moll, Esmeralda, Stanley, and the 5 little tabbies to a midnight party of sardines, shrimps, and liver to be held at Mr. Humber's garage among his old cars. "Well, well," said Bill Briggs as he put away his jeep and went down to the cabin of the Gypsy Queen to make himself a cup of tea. "Those flipping little cats. They've all got character and no mistake. There's never a dull moment when they're around. Now, I wonder what they'll do next." The end.